Welcome to the Complete Streets Commission's August 24th regular commission meeting. This is a hybrid meeting with commission members, city staff, and members of the public participating in accordance with public health guidelines. I would like to introduce Complete Streets Commission members and city staff present. I'm Chair Jackie Sebrian. Commissioners present include Katie Baruzzi, Sally Cole, and Ross Silverstein. Commissioner absent include Brian Altman, Lisbeth King, and Christopher Coleman. City staff present include Kevin Chen, Matthew Hugh Louch. Chair, oh, that's me. Kevin, would you please provide instructions to the commission and members of the public on how the meeting will proceed?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm actually going to turn it over to Matthew Hugh. So just a quick introduction. Matthew's the gentleman that's on your screen right now. He's our latest addition to the transportation team. Matthew came in as an assistant engineer with a lot of experience, with some experience in local jurisdictions as well. So definitely welcome him aboard, and he'll be, from now on, he'll be taking over the responsibility of Patrick's. So welcome, Matthew, and then at this point, I'll let him take over.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Kevin, Chair Sebrian, and members of the Complete Streets Commission. Happy to be here. Welcome, everyone, to the August 24th Complete Streets Commission meeting, and thank you for attending. For members of the public who wish to provide public comment for any item on tonight's agenda, after the chair calls for public comment on that item, virtual attendees may engage the raised hand feature, or if you're calling in from a landline or cell phone, press *9 to raise your virtual hand. If you are participating in person, please wait for the chair to call your name, and then you can step up to the podium to make your comment. That concludes the instructions, and I return the meeting to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Under reports and announcements, city staff and commission members may communicate general information of interest regarding matters within the jurisdiction of the commission. No commission discussion or action can occur on any of the presented items. Kevin, can you provide reports and announcements? Or report?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's actually a light month for us. City Council didn't really take much action in terms of transportation. So just one update for you that the City Council did authorize city staff to submit a grant application. If we were successful with this grant, it will go towards the improvements along Willow Road between Bay and Bayfront Expressway. So I believe I sent an email out to the commission for that particular item. Essentially, it will be improvements along that stretch of Willow Road, including ped bike and some signal improvements as well. So with that, I will conclude my announcements. Thank you.
I have something that I feel like staff could have announced because it's their thing, but there's been a really nice change to Santa Cruz Avenue. The staff worked really quickly, I thought, but with Ali from Bistro Vida and a 14-year-old from Hillview Middle School and some of the council members to create what I'm thinking of as a bike channel past the street closure on that block where kids were riding the wrong way on their bikes. And I haven't been down there since school started, but when I checked it out a couple of days ago, it looked fantastic. And I think it'll be a big improvement. So I really want to laud staff and council members and everybody else who was involved in getting this done.
Does anybody else have anything?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I have a couple of reports. One of them is that I just of interest. Sometime last month, I went with Katie to a Belhaven Safe Streets presentation by Hugh, and it was awesome. And I thought it was a great opportunity to get community input about what was going on in Belhaven and what concerns people had. And I thought there was great feedback from a lot of people. So that was awesome. And then the other thing I want to say is having now been using Middle Avenue for some amount of weeks since we took parking away, and now on the first day of school, it's lovely to be able to ride long stretches of Middle without having to go into cars to get around parked cars. It would be awesome when that extends for the whole street where all those no parking signs are. So I would love to see the city make that happen more. Anyway, otherwise, I quite like it. So thanks. Under regular business, the commission considers recommendations from city staff on policy matters or administrative actions that require commission approval. The first regular business item tonight is accept the Complete Streets Commission minutes for July 12th, 2023. Is there any clarification from the commission before I take public comment? Matthew, can you please call for public comment?
Thank you, Chair Seabrian. For virtual attendees who wish to provide public comment, you may engage the raised hand feature, or if you're calling in from a landline or cell phone, press *9 to raise your virtual hand. If you're participating in person, please wait for the chair to call your name, and then you can step up to the podium to make your comment. Seeing no raised hands in the virtual Zoom, I return the meeting to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Do I have a motion and a second to accept the minutes?
I'll move to accept the minutes.
Second. All in favor?
Great, thank you very much. If I may, who second the motion?
Me, Sally.
Thank you very much.
That wasn't part of my script. Okay, staff member Hugh Louch, Assistant Public Works Director for Transportation. Can you introduce the item on update on Coleman and Ringwood Avenue transportation study?
Thank you, Chair Seabrian. Yes, I'm Hugh Louch. I'm Assistant Public Works Director of Transportation here in the city of Menlo Park. And we are joined, there he is, by Cameron Nye from WTrans, who is going to help present this item. And I'm going to quickly share my screen from here. Give me 1 second with the presentation, and we will go from there. There it is. Okay, you should all be seeing my screen. And Cameron, take it away.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Cameron Nye, engineer with WTrans, and we're the lead consultant on this project. I'll also introduce my colleague and the principal in charge of the project, Mark Spencer, who will be available for any questions that may come up later on. We've been working with the city on this project for about 18 months now, and we also have tool design on our team to lead the engagement effort. So we can go ahead and move to the next slide here. Okay, so before you tonight, I'm gonna talk a little bit about the purpose of the study and the needs and the goals that were identified and developed. We have an overview of the community engagement activities that have been conducted over the last 18 months. And we also have some design alternatives that we will review together today. I also understand that you've been given the 10% concept plans in advance, so I'd be happy to answer any questions and talk about specifics about those. And then we will get into some of the next steps and where the study goes from here to reach its conclusion. So we can move to the next slide. All right, so these corridors, so Coleman and Ringwood Avenue, have been discussed for a number of years, and needs for improvements with regards to pedestrians and bicycles have been something that has risen in the eyes of stakeholders for quite some time out here. So study efforts date back at least 20 years, potentially more, on these corridors, and most recently, further study and consideration of the need for pedestrian and bicycle improvements were identified in both the county's active transportation plan and the city's transportation master plan. So this study was identified as a high priority project in both of those previous planning efforts. So there is a need there to review those recommendations from those previous plans and expand on and reconcile any differences there. And then there are a number of schools located on these corridors, which really add a level of complexity and a need for some safe routes to school considerations there. So early on in this process, an overarching goal was developed, and that is to develop a community-driven preferred plan to improve mobility for active modes of transportation and to improve safety for all roadway users. So that has been the overarching goal throughout this project. And we can move to the next slide. Okay, so just as a quick overview here, the study corridors are Ringwood Avenue between Middlefield and Bay, and then Coleman Avenue between Ringwood and Willow. And both, oh, we can back up there a little bit. Just going to say that both of these corridors have shared jurisdictional boundaries. So Coleman is divided up into a county section as well as a city section. And then on Ringwood Avenue, the city section is on the southern end there in front of Menlo-Atherton High School. And then it transitions to the county section as you move further north. And there is a little sliver on the west side of the corridor that's within the town of Atherton. And then on this map, you'll see that there are a number of schools in the area, including Laurel Lower School campus and Menlo-Atherton, both on Ringwood Avenue. We can move to the next slide here. So really our work kicked off in earnest about 18 months ago in February of 2022, when we got started with the existing conditions assessment and kicked off phase 1 of our engagement effort there, seeking input on needs and existing conditions. From there, we moved into an evaluation criteria development period, along with the initial development of some street design alternatives. And then we are currently in a transition here between the street design alternatives evaluation and selection, and we're getting ready to move into the draft transportation study phase here pretty quick. And then at the bottom of the screen here, there's some icons. The icon on the left there, the community and technical advisory committees. There's 4 of those icons on this timeline here. And just as recently as on Monday, we had our 4th meeting with the community advisory committee. And last Thursday, we had our 4th meeting with the technical advisory committee. And then throughout the project, there have been a number of public engagement and outreach efforts, which I will discuss in more detail later on. And then this winter, we'll be looking to present to City Council and the County Board of Supervisors. So the overarching main goal of our engagement effort throughout the project has been to facilitate engagement with a diverse range of stakeholders that have different needs and wants on these corridors. And those include people who work in the area, attend school in the area, or just travel through the corridors, reaching different destinations. And we've developed some specific goals, and those include identifying and gathering feedback on those needs and existing conditions, and better understanding the transportation issues that are out there, as well as any barriers and opportunities. And then one of the key specific goals here has been building consensus throughout the engagement effort, and understanding that there are going to be trade-offs that are necessary in order to implement improvements. So building space for that compromise to happen as well has been a key part of this project. And then of course, building momentum and support for the study, and then hopefully improvements at some point in the future. Okay, so we have hosted a number of community engagement activities throughout this project, with 15 in-person events, and those were a mix of pop-up events, which were held on the corridors. The picture on the top left there, the bicyclist placing a sticker on a poster board, was one of our pop-up events. We also hosted walking tours on the corridors, 2 of those last fall. And then we held an interactive community workshop in May, which is depicted in the picture on the right-hand side of the screen there. As well as 2 different community surveys, one during our first phase of community engagement and then one during the second phase. And these surveys were available both online as well as in a paper fashion, which we had assistance distributing those with our collaboration with community-based organizations. And then, of course, we had ongoing online engagement happening as well via the project website that was set up, and fielding any email messages from stakeholders and responding to those throughout the project as well. So during our phase 1 community engagement, we identified some priority values and top concerns. So In terms of priority values, children's safety was identified as the #1 value throughout the engagement, followed by having dedicated space to comfortably and safely walk and bike on these corridors. And additionally, the preservation of neighborhood character, being trees, greenery, circulation, things of that nature, was also identified as a priority value by the community. And then in terms of top concerns, the lack of existing pedestrian and bicycle facilities on both Coleman and Ringwood Avenue were a concern that came up time and time again, as well as lots of concern around speeding issues and dangerous driving behavior. And as a result, speed reduction and traffic calming became a key priority of in the alternatives development. And then also some top concerns included illegal parking and the lack of crossing opportunities on the corridors. So during the second phase of community engagement, there was desire for vertical separation between the bike and travel lanes on Ringwood Avenue was identified, as well as support for separate facilities for bikes and pedestrians. And you'll see in a little bit that the alternatives for Ringwood Avenue look at potentially removing that existing right turn lane into the high school. And so there was some division over that. And then there was a lot of chatter and a lot of requests about the desire for a new pedestrian crossing in front of Menlo African High School near the bus stop. And then on Coleman Avenue, there was a strong preference for bike lanes over a bike boulevard within the county portion. And there was initial support within the community for a one-way street alternative on within the county section that was looked at. And then there was that kind of backed off a little bit once stakeholders were really walked through the potential circulation impacts associated with the one-way street. And then there was concern with parking removal within the city section of Coleman and some mixed feelings about traffic circles. Okay, so here on the screen, we have a cross-section view of the alternatives that have risen to the surface within the city on Coleman Avenue. The top, and both of these alternatives are bicycle boulevard at their core, but with some slight differences here. So the alternative on the top is a bicycle boulevard with parking on both sides of the street. And so this alternative here would retain the existing parking, which is out there currently, and it would really focus on speed reduction measures and things of that nature to make the on-street cycling experience more comfortable. And then the existing sidewalks would be retained. And then the alternative on the bottom here is also a bicycle boulevard, as I mentioned before, but this alternative looks at removing parking on one side of the street. And then with that space, it would be reallocated towards a wider sidewalk that would effectively become like an elevated shared use facility of sorts, so that those cyclists, potentially school-age cyclists that aren't comfortable cycling in the street, would then have a facility where they could cycle off-street. So the more experienced cyclists would still be accommodated on-street in the bicycle boulevard, and then less experienced cyclists could use the shared use pathway. And again, this alternative, the trade-off there is removing parking on one side of the street. Okay, so we have a couple snippets here from the concept plans that were provided to you. So the picture on the left here is that alternative that looks at parking removal on one side of the street and then has a wider shared use pathway on that top side there. And to the left of the intersection, we've identified a raised crossing. And really this crossing is to help facilitate the transition between the county section and the city section. The alternative one in the county section looked at Class 2 bicycle lanes. So there is a need there to transition between the bicycle boulevard and the Class 2 bike lanes for those that aren't comfortable cycling within the street. And then on the right-hand side there, this is the alternative that would look at retaining the existing parking out there. And again, we do have a raised crossing. This time it's on the right side of the intersection there, where there is more existing infrastructure to facilitate that crossing. And then some other things I want to point out here that we're looking at in terms of the sharrows, doing the greenback sharrows to indicate the shared use travel lanes, as well as enhanced signing and striping really up and down the corridor. And we can move to the next slide here. Okay, so the picture on the left, we have Santa Monica Avenue. So both of the alternatives that we developed here include installation of always stop controls at the Santa Monica Avenue intersection, as well as building that intersection out with crosswalks on all legs, and then a good sized curb extension on the north side of the street there to really shorten the crossing distance and provide some traffic calming there. And then do just want to point out again that wider expanded sidewalk on the north side there of the street, the trade-off there is the removal of parking on that south side of the street. And we did hear throughout engagement that the preferred side of the street for the parking to remain would, of course, be on that north side adjacent to the apartments. And then on the right-hand side here, we have a snippet of the Coleman Place intersection where we've implemented a raised crossing there to provide some traffic calming and some speed reduction, as well as enhanced signing and striping there. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, Coleman is divided with partly within the city and partly within the county. So the same process that was carried out throughout the city was also done within the county section. And I won't go into as much of the details here on the county side, but I do just want to make you aware that there were alternatives that were developed. And the two alternatives within the county, one of them is a bike lane alternative. So the street would be widened and Class 2 bike lanes would be provided, and then an asphalt pathway that the intent there would be for it to meander to avoid as many trees and existing encroachments as possible would be provided on the north side of the street. And then in comparison, the bottom alternative there is a bicycle boulevard. And then because there would be no street widening there, we have a little more space to actually provide a wider off-street pathway on that left side of your screen there. So difference is bike boulevard versus Class 2 bike lanes, and then a narrower versus a wider off-street pathway. And then within Ringwood Avenue, these cross sections here, I want to point out, are specific to Menlo Atherton High School. And this is the location where you have an existing bus stop out there. And Ringwood Avenue does change characteristics from the high school moving further north. But for the purposes of just looking at a cross section here, there's much more to consider adjacent to the high school. So we use that as one of our focus areas. And the primary differences between the two alternatives that are shown here before you is the removal of that existing right turn lane into the high school driveway, and alternative 1 on the top there. So that right turn lane would be removed, and then we'd have space to implement a southbound bike lane, which does not currently exist out there. Only that northbound bike lane exists immediately adjacent to the high school. And then a striped buffer would be provided as well as a race separation device, which would essentially make these a Class 4 bike lanes along the high school there, only in that southbound direction. And then on the bottom alternative, that right turn lane would be retained. And then you'd have a narrower off-street pathway compared to the wider off-street pathway on the top alternative there. So trade-offs, the removal of that right turn lane, you have more space to put in that southbound bike lane, and then a wider off-street shared use pathway versus the bottom alternative, which would look to retain that right turn lane, and then cyclists would share the travel lane with motorists. Okay, so we are seeking input from you tonight. We've also received great input within the last week from the Community Advisory Committee, the Technical Advisory Committee, as well as the county's BPAC. So we'll be looking to further refine these alternatives and flesh them out more. And then next month, we'll be looking to get into the draft study and finish up the final study sometime this fall. And then this winter, we'll be looking to present to the board as well as council and looking for them to approve the community-driven preferred plans that have been developed. So with that, I will open it up to questions.
Hello. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very informative. I just wanted to look at the map for a moment, not the study map, the map of the area with the very simple in the beginning where it just had Coleman and Ringwood. You could sort of see them. Yeah. So I just wanted to ask a few questions because just with this information alone, it's clear that this is a really vital, both are vital corridors for children and young adults going to school. But my understanding is that Laurel is now split between two campuses. That wasn't mentioned, but I think that's on the other side of Willow. Is that correct? So there's even more. I think that's worth noting because it does provide the information that Coleman's critical to that thoroughfare as well. The Laurel one side, Laurel the other. The other thing is my son went to Hillview Middle and a lot of his friends lived down by Bay Road. So in addition to the Menlo-Atherton traffic coming down there, there's also the Hillview, lots of kids biking to Hillview, starting down in the Bay Road area and biking down Ringwood. So that's another school that's involved in creating these corridors for bikers and walkers going to school. The other thing, it's my understanding that Coleman is a thoroughfare as well for school buses. Is that correct? The yellow school buses?
There's some school bus use of it, and I think also a Samtrans bus that uses it as well.
Okay, so speaking to Coleman right now, it's clear that it is a very highly utilized, multi-use, diverse use corridor here with a lot of competing uses. And so with that being said, I do want to draw attention again, or at least reiterate that the goal of the study was to improve mobility and safety for all roadway users. And it does seem like there are many types that need to be taken into account. So, okay.
I have a couple clarifying questions. When we talk about alternative, I guess the alternative 2 for Coleman, you use the term Bike Boulevard a lot. How is Bike Boulevard specifically defined other than a normal road? I mean, it's a shared space between bikes and cars. Does Bike Boulevard have other specific characteristics that make it a bike boulevard? Or do we just, that's what we call it because there's not a bike lane?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I would say thinking about the sort of, we actually have a definition in our general plan a little bit that we can get into or pull up if needed, but thinking more generally about it, I would say what we're trying to achieve with a bike boulevard is where there are places where bikes and vehicles need to share the space, where they can't be separated for one reason or another, or we don't think it makes sense for them to be separated. We're trying to manage speeds to a level where that sharing can happen in a more safe kind of way. And so, in this case, this is why there's quite a bit of traffic calming and other things in here so that we bring the speeds down so that they can still share in space, if not separated.
Okay. My next clarifying question. In alternative 2, if the sidewalks get expanded wide enough to be able to accommodate both walkers and bikers, would that be a formal designation, or would that just be de facto allowed because it's wide enough to accommodate that? I mean, would there be signage? Would there be like an actual bike path on the expanded sidewalk, or it's just a big shared space that anyone can use?
Yeah, that's another great question. So we haven't maybe figured that out yet is the answer, but you certainly could designate it as a shared use path. And as you say, sort of use the right kind of markings and one thing and another to help make sure that people understand that it would be used by multiple users. There are a variety of ways to do that. You say signs, markings, and other kinds of things that we could possibly do. I think that's a decision that we're very much at the concept level of design right now, and so we would be working out some of those details depending on what direction we ultimately get to move forward with.
One last clarifying question, and then I'll leave comments on the whole project until the end. But would it be possible, or was it considered, to prevent through traffic of cars along Coleman specifically? I know buses will go through there, so you wouldn't be able to have barriers, but was it considered to say this is a bike and bus corridor, and we'd want to reduce traffic overall there? Or is that just not on the table?
Yeah, and it's a really good question, and Cameron may want to speak a little bit to the some of the options that we talked about. But there was a one-way option for the county portion primarily. The city portion, that would be a little more challenging given the kind of character and use of the street that we see. I think the thing that's hard is if you're letting buses go through, other than like putting up a sign that says don't go through. I don't know.
Yeah, it would be signage only.
And yeah, so that's an interesting idea. I wouldn't say we considered like a signage only option, or if it would really be something that would be well respected given the number of people who do travel through and do go back and forth. I think to Vice Chair Cole's point, we do see a lot of parents doing a lower Laurel drop off or whichever direction it is, and then an upper Laurel drop off, right? Because they have kids of different ages at two different schools, and some of them do that by bike, and then some of them do that by car, of course. So it might be a little bit challenging if we tried to do that, but it's certainly something that could be considered. But yeah, we didn't formally consider like a signage-based closure. We did talk about a one-way option, as I say, which would have some impact. We did have conversations about an actual closure that then would only be sort of emergency vehicles and bikes, say. And I don't know, Cameron, if you want to speak to some of the kind of feedback that we had about that.
Yeah, so I think it was mentioned earlier about just how multi-use the corridors are. So there really is a huge consideration for pedestrians, bicyclists, school buses, transit, really everything out there. So makes it more challenging, not impossible. But we did look at one of our initial draft alternatives was a one-way street option. And there was some support within the community for that. When we did go to the interactive community workshop that was held in May, that was one of the alternatives. And there was a lot of discussions had there about what would happen to the circulation patterns if you did look at a one-way street or a diverter or something like that. And it really became quite obvious that it would then put a lot of pressure on other surrounding and adjacent streets. So it's kind of like a net sum game there between where would those traffic volumes go. And so that's really why the one-way street and a more substantial alteration, things of that nature, changing traffic patterns really wasn't looked at as favorably by the community.
I have a follow-up question to Commissioner Silverstein's comment. In terms of car traffic, obviously we know the residents who use the street in cars and also drop off their kids. But is there a data to support that this is like a commuter cut through street?
Yeah, I was just asking, we did look at that. We do, yes, there is definitely folks who are kind of coming and cutting through, say like they're coming down Willow and they're trying to find other ways to Middlefield or beyond. So we know that happens. I don't have in front of me the exact share, but it's something we can provide.
And I guess my last question, clarifying question, Hugh, is there a practice in the city of Menlo Park for restricting certain kinds of uses of a particular street, like no cars on the street? Just curious, aside from that one block of downtown Santa Cruz that we know about. Is that something we've utilized?
So we have a couple small closures, right? We have the Clover lane closure right behind kind of Willow's Market, just off Willow, that doesn't allow vehicles to travel through. And then of course we have the Blake Street eventual closure that we anticipate will happen as part of the Middle Avenue project. And I don't think there are any others, but there may be. Kevin, you want to?
I believe there are two streets in Belhaven neighborhood that was done a long time ago. That was kind of that nature, and they were built with actual concrete barriers, etc. But yeah, those my understanding were that those used to be open streets and were closed off.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a bunch of questions, and I was going to batch them by segment. Is that okay? Okay. So on the city segment of Coleman, I'm curious about whether we have people with overnight parking permits on that street, and if so, how many? Do we know that?
We don't know that tonight, but we can get that information.
Okay, because I know
I
some.
anticipate that, yes, very likely they do, given the character of those apartments, similar to other apartments where it's quite common.
I think it would be good to know, you know, what the off-street parking at the Coleman Block apartments looks like, whether they are one of those blocks that's grandfathered in and gets to have overnight parking permits, and like what the utilization is. That seems important. I'm also wondering where the bus stops are on Coleman.
Yeah, I think I believe there's definitely one in the county section. And I should say we are joined by our county project manager tonight, Vanessa Castro, who's here. So I mean, say hi. Yeah, there are a couple. And again, I think the school bus that uses it, I believe, doesn't actually stop. It's just going through between the two different Laurel campuses. But I do think there's a Samtrans bus, and we can look that up.
The bus stops within the county are near the Menlo Oaks intersection.
I was also wondering about just like the number, and this sounds like you wouldn't have this information yet either, but just, you know, how many parking spaces would be theoretically removed? And is there a sort of equivalent number of parking spaces available on the other side? Like, is it roughly equivalent? Because I'm going to make a strong recommendation later on that sort of depends on understanding that.
Yeah, I think it's probably approximately equivalent.
Okay.
We can certainly get that information.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, get the total length.
Okay, so that was the city section. So county section, actually, I don't have questions about the county section. Oh, I have one more question about the city section, or no, I'll use it as a comment later. So Ringwood by MA, I noticed in the map of the intersection with Ringwood and Middlefield that there was a green, what looked like sort of like a green crosswalky type thing on the, I guess we would call it north leg of the intersection across Middlefield. Is that what we're thinking bikes are going to do? No, right? That's for pedestrians.
Across Middlefield.
Yeah, if you go to the map, sorry, I could tell you which number it is.
You're talking about the plans that were attached.
Page 31. Yeah, the plans that were attached.
Give us a second. What I would say is that anything that's shown on Middlefield is not necessarily, this study kind of stops on the
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Menlo Atherton side of Middlefield.
Okay. I do have like there's a place in our city right now at the intersection of AV and Santa Cruz where there's some confusion, where there's like a bike lane that actually goes left and there's a bike merge into the through traffic lane that's always a lot of cyclists go straight there. And I feel like we might have a similar situation at this intersection, and we can talk about it more later, but I'm paying attention to the intersection and thinking about that. Hold on, let me get back to my questions, and I'm so sorry I'm taking so much time, but all right. So this was important. Unfortunately not in the presentation today, but in the slides, one of the driveways to the school got disappeared. There are 3 driveways. There's one next to the tennis courts, and that one seems to just sort of not have a crossing of the bike ped vision. And I'm wondering if that was an oversight. We're not going to disappear that
along Ringwood.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, certainly we can. And Cameron, I don't know if you have a response to this, but feel free to jump in. Certainly we can look at and talk to the county about if you're missing that there's a driveway and that you want a marked pedestrian crossing.
I think that's, I mean, it's not a huge, I feel like it's not a huge amount of parking there, but it's definitely one of the 3 intersections that causes problems during busy times. Okay. The other, I would love to hear, but maybe we don't have that information, what MA and Laurel administrations thought about these alternatives. And then on the Ringwood section closer to Bay, and this also sounds like it's probably outside the scope of the project, but I'm going to say it anyway. at that intersection of Bay and Ringwood, I love the bidirectional bike ped path, because that's what a lot of kids are doing anyway. But the other thing that a lot of kids are doing anyway is when they get to that intersection, they're super sketchy and unpredictable, because it just kind of like the little pathway that they've been on just ends. And so I would love us to do the bidirectional pathway, but I also want to figure out how we can like safely transition the kids, because then what we're doing effectively is adding almost like a 6th leg to the intersection that's already 5 legs. So that'll be interesting to Bay and Ringwood. Okay, that's what I have. Thanks.
I have one question. Can you put it back on the slide at the beginning of this that had the sort of goals of the project again? Let's see, somewhere in there. Thanks. Okay, I was just looking for what I recall that there was somewhere in there that we were trying to emphasize the looking at the active modes of because those anyway, I was just seeking to find that because I couldn't remember where I saw it. Thanks. Matthew, can you please call for public comment?
Yes, thank you, Chair Cibrian. For virtual attendees who wish to provide public comment, you may engage the raised hand feature, or if you're calling in from a landline or cell phone, press *9 to raise your virtual hand. If you're participating in person, please wait for the chair to call your name, and then you can step up to the podium to make your comment. I see 2 raised hands on Zoom right now. The first comment will be the phone call with the last 4 digits, 9741. You are unmuted.
Yes.
And,
yes. Thank you. I just back to the bus stops. I did have one comment on that, and there is a bus stop in the city section that's right across from Santa Monica on Coleman, on the other side next to the apartments, and I think there's still a bus stop on the other side as well, a Samtrans bus stop just directly across from the corner on Santa Monica. So I think I know of at least 1 and probably 2 right there at the intersection of Santa Monica and Coleman. I don't know if they're formal bus stops, but the bus stops there definitely over next to the apartments across from Santa Monica. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. And for the second comment, we have Kevin Rennie.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Committee members, staff, W-Trans, thank you for all the work that you've done on this. I live with my family in the Willows neighborhood. I have 2 kids at Lower Laurel, with safety as the key concern. I feel like a greater review of the city portion of it needs to be reviewed. The transition between the county possible wider path separation. I have a 4-year-old that actually rides her bike to Lower Laurel, and right now it's super sketchy, and a lot of times we just don't go depending on our mood. And there's so many driveways, and the parked cars on the apartment side of Coleman, you can't see anything that's going on. A car will pull out the driveway basically so they can see around the car and then try to pull out, and we have to stop a lot of the time and let them go out or back up. So it's a lot of back and forth. I forget which committee member made the comment about the overnight parking permits. I had a question about that as well. So thank you for bringing that up. In addition to that, there's people park on the sidewalk on Santa Monica, and that forces, we used to go Santa Monica to Gilbert to get back. Now we're kind of, if Coleman gets improved, we won't do that anymore. It was just a little bit safer because Coleman in general is just has so much volume and otherwise. But yeah, on Santa Monica, it would be nice if somebody could figure out if in that area, if you're allowed to park your car on the sidewalk, that would be nice. My overall vision or preference would be a bike lane or bike path, bike boulevard that's separated, just because the kids at that age going to Lower Laurel, they're going to start at 4 years old or something like that, at least for some portion, and build from there. And then yes, I at some point would be going back and forth between Lower Laurel and Upper Laurel. So that would be nice, and a better connection between the Willow Oaks park there would be nice, all on one side and continuous. And one last remark on Ringwood. The plans look good. I would like to see something continuous go all the way through Burgess, if that's not part of this program, but just a note for the committee members. Thank you all. I'll take the rest of the time off. And back to the chair.
Thank you for your comments.
So before we take the rest, I'll just, we did identify there are about 30 folks who have overnight parking permits in the buildings, the apartments on Coleman.
Do you know if that can be accommodated on one side of the street?
I don't know that off the top of my head, but we can look into that.
Okay.
We have a third.
I don't know if this is okay to ask, but I didn't understand the last sentence of this public comment. You said something about Burgess?
I think the question was about continuing the Ringwood path all the way through Burgess. And I guess what I would say, I can give you some information about that just as a quick response if the chair is okay with that, which is that, there is a proposed major development at the SRI site. Right. It does include paths through their site. It's a closed site now. It would be opened. And if anybody's participated in that, they're aware there are kind of paths on both sides of the development, one of which would connect down through to Burgess is the concept. And then eventually, of course, to the eventual middle undercrossing. So.
We have 2 more public raised hands virtually. The third virtual public speaker is Adina Levin.
Hello, Complete Streets commissioners and staff and consultants. Adina Levin, Menlo Park resident. And I am not gonna have specific suggestions. We'll generally want to support making things safer for people walking and biking on the street, but I'm not going to have specific suggestions as to how. The question that I have and potential suggestion with regard to the some of the parking issues where there are the 30 people with the overnight parking permits and being able to accommodate people who do need to park a car. And there are across Willow some small retail businesses that have parking lots that are almost unused at night. And while that would not, while shared parking using those lots would not work for 100% of everybody. I am wondering whether there might be some potential to, provide some of that space for people for whom that worked as someplace to also park at night. Coming home obviously would involve like crossing the street and walking a little bit, which is, have some inconvenience. But if this is something that can be a part of the solution for some people, that would also enable more of the street to help provide safety for people. That is something that I would ask about, looking into. Thanks.
Thank you. We also have a virtual public comment from Jenny Mitchell.
Good evening. Hello, my name is Jenny Michelle, and I'm from the Coleman Place neighborhood block. So I actually live on Willow Road at the Willow Manor apartment complex. And our son is 9. He's a 4th grader at Upper. He went to Lower. And before that, he was getting speech therapy there when he was at Applebee's, now Safari Kids. So we've been going through this cycle. I went to Peninsula School, so I know Coleman. I know this area my whole life. So so basically as a bicyclist, I'm a car, like I just ride my bike in the middle of the street. I'm a car because yes, correctly, when people come out of their vehicles on Coleman, they're obstructing the pathway for the bicyclists. That's just how you have to run it. I support parking in other neighborhoods. There's an unused medical facility across the street from us on Willow. I'm sure the owner would be totally down for the city to rent out the spaces, or I don't know, they get some sort of credit. I don't know how that works, but I'm sure there's something that could be negotiated there. I think there's also could be some education and outreach for people. Laurel has just implemented a new bike bus program that's really cool that's happening. And so there's this nice flow, but I think vehicles are not clear about what exactly is happening. So that would be better if they knew. Also, there's a lot of our workforce that lives on Coleman right here. So we really want to support them as much as possible. So we were kind of balancing a lot of interests here. I get that. I really like the bollard ideas because that's definitely always the best way to help protect, just bodies physically. And then there was one more thing, parked overnight. Yeah, we could do a whole overnight parking sidebar thing that I'm interested in. And anyway, that time, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Seeing no more virtual raised hand, I return the meeting to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have a card for a speaker here, Alan Marmelstein.
Hi, thank you. So my name's Alan. I live on Coleman Avenue and I commute to work every day riding down Coleman Avenue and Ravenswood Avenue. And I just thought it might be helpful, like some of the other commenters pointed out, that some of the diciest encounters I have on Coleman Avenue are cars pulling out of the parking lots from the apartments. And it is very difficult to, when you're pulling a car out of those driveways, to see down the street because of all the other cars parked on that side of the road. So it was a little unclear what the proposal was regarding like which side of the street parking would be moved off of. I think off of the apartment side or on the apartment side. But anyway, having all those cars there really does make it, a little bit more challenging as a cyclist. And I think the commission's been putting forward some very good proposals in terms of the traffic calming and proposing bike lanes. So thank you all for that.
Thank you for your comment. So commission members, do we have any feedback?
I've been waiting for this moment. So I was going to bring this up before anyway, but I feel like there's also been consensus in the public comments. And I can understand why people might in a vacuum prefer to have the on-street parking remain on the Coleman block side and the apartment side of Coleman. But to me, it seems like a really bad idea to add a shared use path with bidirectional traffic in a place where we already have a lot of sketchy conflicts and limited visibility. I think especially since the real need here is probably overnight parking, that it's not a huge hardship to have somebody look carefully and cross the street. And I would much rather also, I'm also considering the preschool or daycare, Applebee's, Applebaum, Apple something. And the fact that parents probably use that area for drop off. So I would love, my preference for the city section of Coleman is to go for the shared use path. I think the alternative is basically not really a change. And I don't think you'll see a significant uptick in kids riding their bikes if we do it that way. But I'd like us to move the cars to the parked cars to the other side. I'm also wondering, so 30 overnight parking permits, some of those people are probably parking on Coleman Place, right?
Yes, it also may be, there are 30 locations where people have parking permits, but it turns out that maybe more than 30 total permits, and we're going to need more time to figure out the exact number.
Okay. I think we should do whatever we can to accommodate the existing overnight parking permits. I know a lot of people live in that block, and we have a lot of, essential workers and people who have to drive to get to where they need to go. And I don't want to penalize people who are living in that situation. But I think this is important to make this section a lot safer. The other thing that I agree with is that it's sketchy to have that transition from a two-way bike path next to Reardon. And I don't know how to make it safer. I mean, at one point I was thinking, I wish we were doing the always stop there, but I understand why we're not. But I'm wondering if we could would it even be possible to do like a yield to crossing cyclists or do an RFB or something there? Something just so that the little ones who are probably going to be riding on the sidewalk can like have a safer crossing, a safer transition. Those are my comments for that section of Coleman. Do you want comments on the other bits? Okay, because I have them. But do you want to get comments from other people first on the city part?
I think you can just go through them all. I mean, unless you want to, I don't know. I'd just have you go through them all.
Okay. So on the county section, I have gone back and forth on this, but I really think the bike lanes, especially considering the community feedback, the bike lanes are good. The other thing that we didn't get in the presentation, but that I want my fellow commissioners to know if they didn't pick up on it in the attached document, is that the bike lane actually removes fewer trees. Like there's tree removal in both scenarios, and I think that's going to be upsetting for some people in Menlo Oaks, and we need to figure out, what we do about like, is there a replacement policy? Do we do trees somewhere else? But I think the fact that we could get bike lanes a path and lose fewer trees feels like a winner. I would like to see crosswalks on both sides of on both legs of the intersection at the Coleman Ringwood intersection. I think we're doing that, but I just want to make sure we do that. I also think that no matter what we do, the intersection of Edge Road and Ringwood is going to be really dicey. We already kind of have people going both ways on the sidewalk there, so it's not going to be that different, but definitely feel like we need to continue to have a crossing guard there during drop off. On that segment, I do prefer the separated bike lane for the reason that right now there's not a separated bike lane and cars just sit in it and treat it as a car line. But I feel the same way about MA. But that does mean that it's going to increase congestion there. So we just sort of have to be aware of that and figure out, maybe work with the schools to advertise alternative options, or maybe redesign their drop-off lines a little bit. And I would say by MA, again, same thing, right? It's not really a bike lane when people use it with impunity for parking. And that's been happening. That was actually tonight when I was biking here. I had like cars pulling U-turns in front of me and opening their doors into my pathway. Like while I was trying to bike here, it was like this great meta moment. And it's like, let's fix this. So excited to have that safer. And I think we do need the barrier, unfortunately. I also think it's going to require people to change their behavior, and anticipating that and thinking ahead about it would be really good. And that's what I got. Thanks.
I can go. So I have the fun experience of just starting this week, biking my son to Laurel Lower for the first time. He's starting TK. So have experienced Coleman in the mornings and drop off and everything like that. So speaking from that experience, as well as just like my broader perspective on the commission, I'm not personally particularly concerned about the removal of parking on Coleman. There is parking on all of the other streets around that are not going to be designated to be a bike corridor or a bike boulevard. And we should be fine if people have to walk a block, if that makes biking a lot safer, especially when it comes to kids and schools and everything. And I totally appreciate that people need to park their cars, and I'm very happy for them to be able to do so. And we should also feel very comfortable saying not here. You know, there's no parking on Willow Road, and we can say there's no parking on Coleman Road either. And that's something that we as a community should feel comfortable saying no. And I think that that is my overall perspective for this project, is we should feel comfortable as a community saying that this is going to be a safe route for all people. And it doesn't, you know, it can be one of the very few streets in the entire city that doesn't cater to cars as much. And whether or not that is blocking cars from through traffic or slowing them down, you know, I think that there are pros and cons there, but the impact, for example, that was mentioned around moving it to one way, the impact on traffic in surrounding roads doesn't concern me as much as it does the actual impact that it would have on Coleman itself and making sure it's as safe as possible. Speaking of Coleman, I'm actually torn on whether or not having bike lanes is better or worse. I'm a general advocate of bike lanes, but also as one of the public comments mentioned, so far I've just been biking in the street, and I find that safer because I don't want cars to be speeding by me as I'm on the shoulder. And if you have a narrow bike lane, or if you have to bike 2 people wide because there's a kid, I would rather go at my own pace in the middle of the road and have everyone acknowledge that this is okay because it's a shared space and the cars can wait. And if you have a formally designated bike lane that tells the bikers you have to go to the side, and it tells the drivers you're allowed to go past. And I'm worried that that's actually going to increase speeds and have a counter effect to what we want to have on the broader corridor. I think those are all my comments.
Can I ask you a clarifying question about that? So you said you're not sure about bike lanes. What would your preferred configuration be, or what would the alternative be? Just nothing?
Yeah, I have it be a shared space that bikers can go and cars can go. And when you're biking, you take the lane, and a car can wait behind you because you are as allowed as anyone to use that shared space.
Okay.
I just wanted to follow up on the comments of Commissioners Abruzzi and Silverstein. I think for me, I used to live on Coleman and Berkeley, by the way, a long time ago. I am amazed how much the street has changed. It did used to be a sleepy street. I think we let our dog run around, you know, without a leash kind of thing, and weren't worried about it getting hit. But it has really, really drastically changed. And one of the things we should probably mention is that between the time that, you know, the street was really looked at for all different alternatives to make it more safe, we also had Menlo Atherton's enrollment boundaries change. And now they get a lot more, I mean, now they get additional bicyclists, students commuting from East Palo Alto because of the changes in boundaries. So there's so many reasons. And we all know about the traffic on Willow coming off 101. We talked about that at a recent meeting. There's so many reasons why this has become a really important corridor. And in my opinion, I agree with Commissioner Silverstein that I think as a city, we should be taking these incredibly important corridors and prioritizing the safety of bikes and peds on them because the demand and usage has just so dramatically changed over time, but the street itself hasn't changed in response. And I think that's really critical. The other thing is, I think this, you know, we know from listening to the public talk about to the council directly in March and February about what they wanted the city priorities to be. There were so many comments about bikeability and walkability. And when we take those 2 words and we apply them to Menlo Park, that means creating a connective network. It has to be. bikeability and walkability has to have a network. And it looks to me that Coleman is a missing link in the chain, you know, of this network that we're trying to support, and a really important piece. So given what Commissioner Silverstein just said, I'm sort of thinking to myself about parking and removal of parking on that street. You know, the question of why couldn't we remove parking? I know that the folks, the people who use the apartment building have expressed their need for street parking, but maybe we just haven't talked about this in a granular enough level. But for me, I'm still left with questions about, are there alternatives for them for parking on Coleman in specific? You know, could they park on Coleman Place? I don't know this part of the street as well, but, you know, could they park on Santa Monica, for example? Could they park? I think Jenny Michelle brought up this idea. Is that her name? Sorry. The public comment around, are there places on Willow that could be made available for them to park? I don't know the answers to those questions, but I just want to make sure that we've asked those questions and seen if that's, you know, something we could do without posing great hardship on the folks who need street parking. So that's where I'm left with. The other thing is, following up on Commissioner Abruzzi's comments, did we consider a stop sign on Riordan? I actually think that was really a good question. I mean, that transition is going to be difficult if we go with the shared larger sidewalk space. And also, could we answer that question she posed about at the Coleman Ringwood intersection, are there crosswalks on both sides? That was, she said that. I also would like to know the answer is that part of the proposal? And I also wanted to understand one more thing, which is in terms of parking removal, if we did remove only on one side of Coleman, is the current proposal one of the alternatives to remove it on the apartment building side, right? And is that, okay, but yes, so could you answer that? Because I'm struggling with this issue of that it's unsafe for bikers as they're going by with cars. So yeah, coming out
Thanks,
of the buildings.
Commissioner Cole. So a handful of questions there, which I think I captured, but
thank you.
let me know if I didn't. So vis-a-vis the stop sign, you know, and we have brought items like this to you before, and you will know that even Coleman and Santa Monica wouldn't meet sort of traditional stop warrants. Riordan's quite a small street, and we'd be very unlikely to recommend an always stop there. Santa Monica makes a lot more sense in terms of how people use and the frequency at which you would see a vehicle. So if you have an always stop sign and you never see a vehicle there, it really tends to produce behavior like a lack of compliance, which would be concerning to us. So, you know, I think as staff greatly prefer Santa Monica as a location. And then we can get you an answer on the crosswalks on both sides. I think the consideration there is that we don't necessarily have a sidewalk on both sides or a place for people to go to. So we might not have a crosswalk, we being the sort of greater team. And I think we did get some of that kind of feedback, if I remember correctly, from the CAC. So we can look into that. You could always create a little corner and then they'd cross twice instead of once at Coleman and Ringwood. So that's something I think we need to look into further as a team. But there are reasons why we might not recommend that, although there are also reasons potentially to recommend it. So definitely, as staff, I think we can see that both ways, and we can kind of take that feedback, I think, from you and Commissioner Abruzzi back and look at it in more detail with the consultant and with the full team. And then vis-a-vis the parking, so the way the cross section we showed you and the way the plans were laid out, we would be keeping the parking on the apartment side. And the rationale for that generally was that it varies a little bit depending on what part of Coleman you're on, but we would be intending to kind of create this shared path and then next to it a buffer space, essentially a planted space or other kind of separation. So like you wouldn't have the path right up against the curb. There'd be some space between it. And so then people getting in and out of cars. On the other side, there are some places where there's like a buffered space between the sidewalk, but there are places where there isn't. And so it seemed like it made sense. And it seemed like because the apartment dwellers are generally the greater users of that parking, to put it on that side. However, that's a kind of a detail that if and when this moves forward into a future phase, we could kind of work on and figure out, the trade-offs of those things and which one made more sense. I don't think ultimately when we bring this forward, we don't have to have figured that piece out, because that's just some paint essentially, or some striping on the ground. But certainly I've heard both you and Commissioner Abruzzi sort of indicate you think maybe the other side is better to keep the parking, or certainly Commissioner Abruzzi said that. And I think we can take that feedback and look at it and think through the options and the trade-offs that would be associated with keeping it on one side or the other. I think that was your questions, but did I miss one?
You did not, but I appreciate that Commissioner Silverstein is pushing us to, really prioritize these corridors and think big about how to do that. So I wonder just, off the cuff, what you thought about whether we know enough about whether there are alternatives, places for the apartment building dwellers to park.
Yeah, I think really interesting creative ideas on the parking from several commenters and from the commission as well. As a city, we can't compel a private property owner, obviously, to allow their parking to be used for any other purpose, and especially without cost. So it's entirely possible that that is something that they would be open to, but it's not as simple as us saying, hey, let's do this. So we could certainly take as a potential action item. I don't want to commit to it tonight because it's not necessarily a small action item to pursue that further. But we've had these questions on other projects in the past, and it's not always easy. And then a lot of times, right, it's not actually like whoever. It's like who owns the building, who leases the building, right? Like we don't always, know, and it's not always easy to get in touch with the people maybe who have control. Sometimes there start to be liability questions that they have, and then does the city take on some of that or not? So there's a lot of things to work out with that, but certainly have heard the feedback that it's something to look into further. And from a stepping back parking management standpoint, we have a lot of parking, and much of it is very lightly used. And that's not unique to Menlo Park. That's just the way our cities have been designed. So trying to find those creative opportunities is a great idea, and one that certainly we're open to. I just don't want to overpromise.
Yeah, no, I think that's wise. I guess just sort of a binary question is Coleman Place and Santa Monica. Is there street parking on both sides of those streets?
Yeah, I'm not sure off the top of my head. I think so. Coleman Place is quite small. It's just like a little cul-de-sac. Santa Monica is quite a bit longer, obviously. And I would note that because I think some of the immediately parallel street is Gilbert.
Yes.
And Gilbert also meant to be a bike boulevard, also a street that a lot of kids bike the other way to go to Upper Laurel. And we see that and hear that. And there are also issues there. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I have a couple of things. So I would totally agree with everybody who said that when there are sharrows, I ride in the middle of the road, and that has become a comfortable place for me. Although I notice as I ride through town that that is not what everybody does. And so some people definitely like to hug against the cars. And for that reason, for a variety of reasons, I definitely lean towards the multi-use path. And part of it is because I would love to see more parents and kids feeling safe enough to bike their young kids to school and really start that path of using your bike to get around town as a way of thinking. And so I love making space for bikes who are comfortable to use the middle of the road like I am, and parents and kids who are not yet ready to make that move, but still might like to ride and not be stuck in the morning traffic. And then for kids to be able to ride one way to Lower Laurel and another way to Upper Laurel, it'd be great if that were a choice. So I am in favor of the plan that includes a multi-use path that's wide enough also for bikes to use. As far as, I'm definitely sensitive to the parking issue, because I know that sometimes leases are signed based on sort of the information available, but also I know that we had a lot of discussions about Middle Avenue and parking and apartments. And my observation is the apartments have figured out where to park because that's not where the cars are still parked. So it would be great. Like, I'm sure in the part of like, we thought a lot about that. I'm sure we talked to, you know, in terms of dealing with apartments, like, can they restripe their parking lots to fit more cars? Like, are the apartment buildings themselves using all the space that they have available for parking? And could they look at ways to accommodate their tenants better? I live in a neighborhood in Belhaven that doesn't allow any parking on the streets in front of your house. And sometimes you have to park a block or a block and a half away where there's available spaces. And I've been there for 15 years and it seems like people will make it work. So I think partly when we come to expect that a thing is a certain way, it's hard to imagine how it's going to work when things aren't that way. And I think prioritizing the safety of our youngest users of the road, it just seems like an easy yes for me. The last thing I would say in the discussion about the Coleman ring, it's not the last thing, but it's another from my notes. I'm sorry. The Coleman Ringwood stop crosswalks on both sides, I'm a little more reticent about, and part of it is because there's not a cross street opposite Coleman. And if you put crosswalks on both sides, like that is, I am sensitive to how long it will take a car. Like, I understand that I'm not trying to sacrifice safety, but in this instance, there's not a second crosswalk that they're having to cross on that other side. And so I would probably argue to keep the crosswalk configuration the way it is, because it will slow down that stop sign even more if we put crosswalks on both sides. And that can stack up quite quickly in the morning and then just stack up past anyway. So as far as in front of MA, I think the option where the bikes shared that right lane, the right turn lane into MA, I looked at both of them quite a lot. And what I didn't like when we took away the right turn lane is the way that there was a right turn lane into MA, and taking that away made a straight through for bikes, but then bikes are stuck on the other side of the right turn lane onto Middlefield. Versus the straight, if you leave the right turn lane for cars going into MA, first off, if we're going to take away all those drop-off spaces along Ringwood, where people are currently dropping kids, and push them to drop them off in the parking lot, which is probably how MA's circulation plan is actually written, then I would encourage us to leave that right turn lane, but let it also be a through for bikes. Because currently I go around it and then I go back into the right turn lane. And so if only bikes could go straight through there, that might be a nice place where I don't have to merge as much with traffic. So yeah, so I liked the option that allowed bikes to use that right turn into the MA parking lot as a straight. And then leave the right turn into the MA parking lot, because immediately following it is another right turn onto Middlefield, and both options seem to include that, if I remember correctly, but maybe I don't. And this is the last thing. The issue with whether we remove parking on the apartment side or the non-apartment side because of how far cars have to pull into the street in order to see whether they can pull onto it. It seems like the multi-use path would be before cars were pulling into that space in some way. So cars would need, those apartments are going to need an earlier stop sign. And so cars are going to have a warning to stop, and then they can pull through and then find their way out onto the street. So I guess it seems like where the multi-use path is far enough back from the parking that perhaps it will create just a second stop for cars, or they'll just wait in the middle of the multi-use path to get out. I think those are most of my comments, but I'm open to anybody else having any other comments. And then if anybody wants to make a motion about something, I'm open to that.
I forgot to mention, so I hear your feedback about the area next to MA is so tricky. I forgot to mention that in that alternative 2, It looks like the lanes widen to 11 feet, but the bike lane is only 5 feet on this sort of, and I like the consistency of 10-foot lanes, and would ask for more space, a buffer, whatever, if we're going to go with that alternative. Especially since there's like a bus stop near there and stuff like that. Oh, wait, I heard in the meeting a couple of days ago that people are talking about maybe moving the bus stop. Is that a thing?
Yeah, that's there's been some conversation about potentially moving the bus stop or reconfiguring the bus stop there in one way or another. And if you look at the Ringwood plans, you'll see that there's a crossing kind of near Arlington. Arlington comes in there, and thinking about exactly where that is and would it make sense. So that's something that needs kind of further exploration, but it has been discussed.
I wanted to mention one more thing that I forgot about that's actually quite concerning. It's the sort of the problem on Coleman during the city section during morning, which is you're riding straight into the sun if you're heading toward Upper Laurel. And you also have a wide variety of drivers, including teenage drivers coming the other way. My concern is when you have school buses and drivers of different ages and people coming out of driveways and kids riding in both directions, as well as teenagers and adults, that using sharrows is, I mean, it's sketchy. I mean, I think we should either bite the bullet and do real bike lanes there on both sides. So what I'm worried about, because it's happened to me, is drivers impatiently passing the 6-year-old riding with her dad, and not noticing the 12-year-old riding in the other direction, or vice versa. So I think if we can create a separate space in that section for cyclists who are not like vehicularly confident, then that's really important.
I have another question, comment. So when we talk about Coleman, the intent of the multi-use path would be to accommodate bikers. Is the same expectation on Ringwood as well for that two-way multi-use path? And if so, what do we know about traffic patterns to be able to accommodate bikers both directions and pedestrians both directions? So if you have someone with a stroller walking on that two-way now multi-use path, will there be conflict between the non-cars of the world where the bikers and the pedestrians now have conflict?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think in kind of all these streets, we're trying to accommodate, and you all have reflected this well in your questions, users of very different ages and skill levels biking, right? And so the multi-use path, I mean, let me just be blunt. The high schoolers are not going to use it, is my sense. They will probably stay in the street as they do now. And they're accommodated in the street, well, because there are bike lanes for them, because it will probably tend to slow down quite a bit because there is a glut of much younger kids using the multi-use path. Now, anything is possible, but I think the idea is that we have different places and that we are trying to provide, in Ringwood, we're trying to provide separation of sort of multiple types to allow different types of users to make their way through. On Coleman, that's much more challenging because of the, more limited right of way that we have and the other issues that we're trying to accommodate for. But I would be quite surprised, having witnessed a lot of high schoolers come barreling down Coleman, if they would find their way up onto the sidewalk. I think they're likely to stay in the street.
So small correction to that, based on living at the end of Ringwood for a really long time. What I've noticed is that the high schoolers travel, they're on the wrong side of the road in a big group a lot of the time. What you'll see is kids with bikes that are walking their bikes or riding or skateboarding with, walking with their boyfriend or their, there's definitely going to be traffic from high school in the afternoon heading home on the multi-use path. There just will be. And in the morning, there will be high school kids walking on it probably, which will be so much safer than what's going on right now. But you're right. I think the people who are biking from Coleman are going to right on the bike path.
Yeah.
And I still think it'll be safer for like the little kids who are going. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good point. The other thing that is imagined for Ringwood, and we did actually, I think we brought this up, and you may have heard it at the CAC meeting, but worth repeating for everybody is that, there is thought about doing more traffic calming on Ringwood itself. And, providing that would also provide opportunities for people to get over to the correct side more easily. And so we'll, technically if you're on the path, that's legal travel movement, but you're right. Like in all the school situations, like it's a glut of people, they're moving all at once. It's very challenging to accommodate all that. And unfortunately, I think hopefully the bell schedules line up right where the little kids and the big kids aren't always at the same time, but it's not always easy.
I was going to say, in my observation, at least so far, like there's a little bit of overlap in the morning, but their afternoon dismissal times are actually quite different. So like when it's chaotic in front of the high school now, because they've changed their bell schedule, it's like almost 4 o'clock, right? It's 3:45 before some of that chaos. So some of them get out later, and what I see is that they ride the wrong way a lot of times, but then they like cross wherever they feel like crossing when it looks like an opening. So they do tend to make their way to the other side of the street. But, and then the other comment I had was, I don't know if anybody has seen it, but Redwood City down Middlefield, north of Woodside, has a wide sidewalk that is meant for bikes and pedestrians, and it's on the other side. So and there's apartments along that stretch, and so there's like parking on the other side of this giant sidewalk, but you can ride all the way up that stretch of Redwood City, and it's a nice, like easy off the road ride, and it's meant for bikes, and there's like clearly marked sidewalk and bike. So
Middlefield. Yeah.
If you go north of Woodside.
It's a class
the
4.
parking protected bike lane.
Yeah, it's a class 4 bike lane. It's very unique in that it's like, because there's a weird thing happening with the drainage there. But no, I agree. I've biked through there and been through there. It's so you basically have like a bike lane that's very clearly marked, that the pavement's a little different too. So it's really obvious. And then you have right next to it the sidewalk. And then there's like some planting and parking and stuff like that.
So in terms of like seeing a model of what we could try to copy. It is, I'll admit, as a regular biker on the roads, like it is a little bit weird to me to ride on a path down the opposite side of the road, but they are still, actually, I'm not sure they might have them on the other side.
They do.
That might be the thing. Yeah. That's why I didn't have that problem.
Actually, this recent discussion reminded me that I did have a clarifying question before. When W-Trans was presenting, I think he said, as you all were collecting a lot of, doing a lot of public outreach and collecting feedback, that there was a desire for a new pedestrian crossing at MA.
Yeah.
So sorry if I'm missing something, but does the current proposal accommodate that?
That's okay. So that was what I was talking about, kind of near Riordan or the bus stop. There's a lot of kids who cross back and forth to the bus stop. And so there's that kind of need. And then, that's why the bus stop potential relocation has been discussed, because it's like, well, if it was closer to the intersection, you could have it all like one crossing, one place, and that could make some sense. That was sort of the idea.
I just wanted to confirm. And then second piece was, there was a mention that on the county side, I think of Coleman, there was like mixed feelings that came up in public outreach around like traffic circles. Was that part?
Cameron, if you want to speak to feedback we've had on the traffic circles.
Yeah, so in the county section of Coleman Avenue, there's a few intersections there that have some kind of pseudo traffic circles protecting the trees in the center of the intersections. And so a lot of the outreach that we conducted, there were a lot of mixed feelings were identified. There was a group of residents that really felt like the traffic circles were great traffic calming measures and really wanted to keep them. There were also comments on the other side saying that, well, they're not really meeting design standards and they don't really feel safe using the intersections, and that they've observed some motorists, cutting the near side corner instead of actually going around in a counterclockwise motion. So just kind of piecing all that together, there wasn't really clear direction one way or the other on those.
But in the current proposal, the current alternatives, are they eliminated? No. Okay.
No.
Okay.
I have one more question. The issue about the overnight parking, I don't know if there's any appetite on the commission for it, but for the discussion, but is there a possibility of allowing for overnight parking, but restricting the hours during the day? So like you couldn't park there from 7 in.the.morning till 5 at night or whatever, but or whatever the time. Anyway, so because there isn't as much bike traffic at night. So I would like highly restrictive on one side of the street would be a way if we needed to sort of like phase it in, but also I've sort of seen what phasing it in looks like, and I'd just say no now.
I think that time of day parking is very reasonable to do in conjunction with enforcement. And absent any enforcement, I have found it to be fine in theory and useless in practice.
Thanks.
And if I may, through the chair, just we did collect data on daytime. We actually didn't collect data on nighttime parking use, but we did collect data on daytime parking use, and there is quite a bit of daytime parking use on Coleman. It's not just at night.
Is that daytime parking, are they cars that are actually like showing up and parking there? Or are they cars that just don't move from?
We don't.
You don't? Okay.
Yeah.
Does somebody want to make a motion?
So we don't necessarily, I mean, you're welcome to make a motion if there's something you really want to make sure that we're captured at this stage, just in terms of process. And Cameron kind of spoke to this. This is sort of the early preview of a set of options. We got a lot of great feedback from you and from the public, members of the public. We really appreciate that. We will be kind of refining those plans. You will have an opportunity to see them again before they go to city council. So this won't be your last opportunity. That would be the opportunity maybe to recommend what you see in front of you or suggest changes again. And so we can take, I think, the feedback we've gotten, unless there's something you feel really strongly want to make sure you have consensus on as a group, and fold that into our next round of revisions.
I just realized I was a page ahead and I didn't need to call for motions.
It's all good.
It doesn't sound like this. Hugh, I guess I'll just leave you with the thought. I know it sounds like it's a ways down the road, but as we get closer to the city, your team presenting to city council, just I think having like some detailed, as you just said, you know, the team had taken the time to do some daytime use parking analysis. Like I would just make sure we do offer the analysis that your team has done around, you know, alternatives to parking and daytime use and everything to the council at the time. I think they'll ask for that down the road.
I want to second that. And also especially this idea of whether or not the daytime parking are actually permanent parking, because I suspect, I have a hypothesis that it's permit parking, and it may just be car storage.
I'm really glad that this came up in front of the commission. I think it's such an important corridor, and really appreciate all the work your team did and also the opportunity to ask questions and comment.
Thank you, everybody. I have a quick question before we get to this next thing. Is it possible to take a small break, like 3 minutes? Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Hugh Louch, Assistant Public Works Director for Transportation, to introduce the update on the Vision Zero Action Plan.
Thank you, Chair Cibrian. Me again. So yeah, very excited to start to share with you all some more information about the Vision Zero Action Plan. This is a plan that we've been working on since last year. And I've got Jonathan Kupfer here from Fair and Peers, who's gonna do a part of the presentation, but I'll start us out and give you some of the background and one thing and another for this. So we'll do a little overview, and Jonathan will talk a little bit about some of the background data and how we're using that data to produce both an understanding of safety and then also where we need to focus our efforts to improve safety on our streets. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the safety strategies that we're looking at very high level. We're just getting that part started, and then where we kind of go from there. So just as a kind of quick high level reminder, you know, the reason why, you know, basic reason why we're doing this plan is that we have a policy that says that we are Vision Zero City, which means we're trying to eliminate our fatalities, traffic fatalities, and we also identify reducing the number of non-fatal collisions by 50%. And, you know, this is obviously something that is really important. We talk a lot about safety and safety as the most important thing that we do. And this is a way to kind of make that real as we think about our transportation system. We've been thinking about safety for a long time. It's a part of all the work we do. Obviously, it was a part of our transportation master plan, but this is kind of just a renewed and sort of singular focus on safety. And we know that, you know, traffic fatalities and traffic collisions have real impacts on people. And we always want to keep that kind of front of mind as we're doing this type of work. So what is Vision Zero, right? So this is an idea that was invented in Sweden, basically. I think they coined the term. And it's about, as I say, really focusing on how we eliminate fatalities and serious injuries on our streets. Oh, I see that I'm not sharing my presentation. So you're all very confused. Sorry about that. Yeah, it sounded great, right? So I'll just go back one slide. All right. One slide had the Vision Zero policy. Very good. Thank you, Kevin. And my apologies to those listening in. And then, you know, starting to talk about what Vision Zero is. And you know, an important part of Vision Zero, something that's kind of emerged out of recent work at the federal level and internationally, is this what we call the safe systems approach, which is about sort of how we get to Vision Zero. And it has some very different characteristics, right? And so you can kind of see here a comparison between what maybe was a traditional approach to safety that we've used historically in our industry and more Vision Zero or safe systems type of approach. So, you know, we're trying to move from accepting fatalities as inevitable and really trying to say, no, they're preventable. We need to think about this as a public health problem, not just a transportation problem. You know, we need to think about, like, we just need people to do the right thing, to accepting that humans make mistakes and that we need to do our best to design our road systems, our programs, everything associated with transportation in a way that makes those mistakes not result in fatalities and serious injuries. And so again, we move from sort of trying to eliminate collisions to actually this very much greater focus on severe collisions, right? Ones with that badly injure people. So there could be strategies in some of the work that we do where collisions could increase, but fatalities and serious injuries would go down, and we would consider that a good thing. And that can be hard for people to take on. So it's important, you know, I think, to really underline that. And then we're again moving from sort of like this is like an individual's response, it's just the police or it's just the people who design the roads, to really a collective all-in approach. We need all the strategies, all the people working together, really, to try to deliver the safety on our transportation system. So that's sort of the background introduction, and now I'll pass it over to Jonathan, who'll talk about the state of safety in Menlo Park.
Yeah, thanks, Hugh. So as you said, I'll talk a little bit through our data analysis to date. So here we see the number of all injury collisions and the number of fatal and severe collisions by year. And so in Menlo Park, in the past 10-year period between 2012 and 2021, there were 6 fatal and serious injury collisions per year, with 124 additional people injured in traffic collisions. There is a notable drop in injury collisions during the pandemic as people have been traveling less, but we're starting to see that is growing again as people are returning to normal activities. So the collision analysis identified a few themes of specific safety challenges in Menlo Park. Some of these might feel familiar to you based on your experience in the city, but these themes are shown here and broken into 3 categories: those that are movement-based, those that are age-based, and those that are location-based. And so specifically, some trends that we're seeing are collisions involving high speeds, conflicts between turning vehicles and people walking, older pedestrians, younger bicyclists. But we also see an above average number of collisions in downtown, in Belhaven, and on state-owned roadways. So those are the location-based themes. So we also mapped the collisions, and based on a mapping, we identified a set of roadways that see higher rates of collisions, which are shown in red. So these roadways represent 19% of the roadways miles of the city, and account for 88% of all injury collisions, 96% of fatal and severe injury collisions, which are the bigger red dots, 77% of pedestrian collisions, and 84% of bicycle collisions. So from our analysis of themes of collisions and mapping of the collisions, we identified a set of citywide emphasis areas to help us organize the strategies that we're going to recommend to address these safety issues. And this approach helps us to be more proactive. So rather than just applying safety strategies to locations that have seen collisions, we can understand what types of locations see different types of collisions, and then identify a set of countermeasures that can be applied to all of those locations. So what is a safety emphasis area? An emphasis area describes a set of roadways that are similar in terms of use, speed, adjacent land use, or other characteristics. Each emphasis area sees similar types of collisions based on the themes that we shared earlier. And because they see similar types of collisions, we can use similar countermeasures, which are typically design, engineering, policy, or education-based tools to help reduce the crash risk in that emphasis area. And so then the recommended treatments for a specific location in the city will depend on which emphasis areas that location is in. These are the 5 draft emphasis areas that were identified from our analysis. And so they're the state-owned roadways, including freeways and El Camino, city-owned higher speed roadways, lower speed roadways, intersections, and school zones, or areas within 1,000 feet of a school. And so with that, a question that we'd like to ask you all to think about is how these emphasis areas sit with your understanding of roadway safety in the city. We'll come back to this conversation after walking through an example of an emphasis area and potential safety countermeasures, but just wanted to plant that for you to think about as we're going through this. So what do these systemic safety strategies look like? We'll start by looking at an example of an emphasis area. So within the emphasis area of intersections, we broke the analysis up into 2 sort of sub-emphasis areas: signalized intersections and side street stop controlled intersections, which are intersections where the minor street has a stop sign, but the major street does not, and has to wait. The minor street has to wait for a gap in traffic on the major street. So in the above map, the yellow circles represent signalized intersections, and black dots represent collisions that occurred at those intersections, while the collisions in gray or the dots that are gray are collisions that do not occur at signalized intersections. And so while intersections within the city, of all the intersections in the city, only 5% are signalized, collisions that occur at signalized intersections make up more than 40% of all injury and fatal and severe injury collisions. Commonly cited factors that lead to these types of collisions or that we're seeing include unsafe speeds, failure to stop or yield, and improper turning. So these things might be related to the signals or the design of the intersections at those signals. I'll pass it back to Hugh now. Hugh's going to talk through some potential safety strategies for these areas.
Thanks, Jonathan. Appreciate that. So yeah, I want to talk a little bit about, just at a high level, some of the types of things that we would be thinking about. And these are offered in the next few slides, without commitment or comment. They're just the range of tools in the toolbox. So we will determine through this process what tools belong in our specific toolbox. So this is more like a broad range of things we might do. And also right now, what we're doing is we're talking primarily about the kind of engineering-y things that we do, but obviously our tools also include, as I said, the full range of other things. There are enforcement-related things, there are education-related things, there are a number of different things that we want to do, and we're going to want to talk about those through this process, and our plan will sort of speak to a lot of those kinds of issues. So the next 3 slides break down into these 3 kind of types of strategies, like things you might do at a signalized intersection, things you might do at an unsignalized intersection, and corridors. So in between intersections, essentially, or maybe covering multiple segments of a street. And there was in the packet for tonight a little handout, I'll note, that has sort of that we've been using for some of the public outreach that identifies a lot of the things I'm about to go through and more. So those are also available. We can speak to those if you have questions. So at signalized intersections, we're looking at a lot of different types of things, or a number of things we can do in terms of how we better protect different types of users. So pedestrians, so Jonathan mentioned, we see a lot of issues at our intersections with, failure to yield and those kind of things. So leading pedestrian intervals, signalizing for bicyclists, protecting left turns better. These are all things that can kind of help with some of those types of issues, or restricting turns. This picture of Willow Road and Ivy Drive that you all are probably somewhat familiar with is a project that Caltrans recently installed at the city's request when they were doing some repaving work. And we got them to do enhanced markings on the crossings, as well as buffers on the bike lanes. And they also, because they were working there and are now required to by law, they also installed leading pedestrian intervals on these streets. So that's a nice little safety benefit that we can achieve through some of those kinds of strategies. Unsignalized intersections, we have lots and lots of them. And as Jonathan mentioned, one of the areas we do see and we do as a potential focus or an emphasis for us are all the kind of places where we only have a stop sign on one street, but not the other. So, side street stop controlled. And those, we have many, many, many of those throughout the city. And we have very long corridors that you're all pretty familiar with, where we have a lot of those. And so, we can do a number of different things there. So I happen to pick an always stop example here, which of course you're all familiar with because we spent a lot of time talking about it recently, which is the quick build we did at Menlo Avenue and University Drive, right by Drager's, which is still out there, and we're still getting feedback on. But there are things like this that we can do that involve sort of removing a turn pocket and kind of reducing the turning radii a little bit to make it a little bit slower as people travel through here. Also, we have around town a lot of these rectangular flashing beacons that UCSU, so like right out here, of course, by the library, but up and down Santa Cruz and in a number of other locations as well. And then there's sort of more aggressive things we can do, like for bicyclists, like a protected intersection where you're completely separating the path of travel for folks. So quite a few different things we can do there. And then the last set of examples I have for you are kind of corridor-based examples. And we have our Middle Avenue Safe Streets pilot project that's been installed now for a while. Then again, kind of happened pretty quickly, but we've talked about in this venue as well, where we removed a travel lane in each direction, replaced it with a center turn lane and buffers on the bike lane. So that's what we traditionally call a road diet. So fewer lanes. We can also do things like narrowing the width of those lanes, some of the traffic calming bike boulevard stuff we talked about earlier today. And then other things, like separated bikeways or, medians that direct how people can travel through and things like that. So those are all kind of corridor types of strategies. And again, running through these quickly. The objective tonight isn't to start to talk about these in a lot of detail, although we're happy to have any conversation you all would like, but just to let you know that there's a sort of broad set of tools that we have available to address safety, and these are some of those. And then I'll just kind of speak quickly about the community engagement we've been doing to date. Chair Cebrian, you mentioned this already, but we have been out there talking to folks in a variety of venues, and just to help provide some information, is what are we trying to do with this engagement process? And, obviously in any engagement process, we're trying to reach, this is a citywide effort. We're trying to reach people across the entire city, but we are trying to really focus as much as we can on people who are particularly impacted by collisions. And so to the best of our ability to really find and reach those folks. And so we're using a variety of strategies for that. One of our goals is to make sure people understand what this is and what its purpose is. And, I spent a little bit of time walking through like why this is different, and building an understanding and awareness of that difference is super important to me personally, because it's the kind of thing where I want all of you and I want our leadership and in the city to be able to articulate why it's different and why that's important, because that will help us kind of move and shift how we talk about safety and how we address safety in the city if we really want to make kind of this meaningful difference that we're trying to make. We obviously want to represent the entire community, all the different voices that are out there, and we want people to see that they can see what their input is as we work on this plan. So how are we doing that? So we have a lot of different activities. We have a stakeholder group that meets, and Vice Chair Cole sits on that group along with folks from fire and police and a number of other different groups that we're trying to participate, transit and others. And those folks kind of vet and see some in more detail than you're going to see tonight, some of this information. We've also done some focus groups. So the meeting that Chair Cebrian mentioned, and we've had 2 public workshops that were held in Belhaven at the library, one in English and one in Spanish that we did with our partners, Climate Resilient Communities, who've also been helping on some other planning work for us. So that those were really productive and helpful, and we got a lot of great information. We're going to be doing a pop-up event at the Farmers Market on September 10th, which I just stole Kevin's thunder about announcements. Sorry, Kevin. And look forward to seeing members of the community there. And then we're doing these types of presentations as well. And we'll be having another full round of outreach when we have more detail on the actions. So right now we've done kind of the background data analysis. We're starting to talk about these emphasis areas, and we want feedback on those, and then that'll shape what we do in terms of thinking about the actions, and we'll have an additional round of outreach to talk about that. And so what are we looking from you for tonight? Obviously, any kind of overall feedback on the process for developing this plan, on any of the elements we've talked about. I mean, we've gone through this quickly, and obviously there's a bit more information in the packet, so we can get into any of that that you would like. We are interested to know if the kind of high collision corridors that we showed kind of resonate, or if you think there are places that are missing or not represented in there based on your experience. And then as Jonathan mentioned, like how do those emphasis areas, those 5 emphasis areas we talked about, sit with your understanding of the city? Do they make sense? One of the things we're kind of particularly focused on is like how we define that second emphasis area. We've been kind of going back and forth, and Menlo Park's a bit of a funny place, obviously, with our street network very like disjointed at major points and interrupted by major other infrastructure. So, defining that is something that we can talk about a little bit. And then if there are any strategy you think are particularly important to highlight, we're happy to kind of hear that now. And I think there's some next steps. So I kind of mentioned this already, but the next step is really take all the work we've done, start thinking about what's in that action plan, and then we'll be bringing it back for plan adoption. It's going to end of this year, early next year. So with that, we'll pause and we can take kind of any questions, or if you want to, I'll leave this slide up maybe for now so that help shape some discussion.
Thank you so much. I'm curious about how you're thinking about this in conjunction with the NTMP, which I know is going to come before council soon, because it feels like we're looking at them as separate silos, but I'm sure you're not. I'm just wondering. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Commissioner Peruzzi. That's a great question, and definitely thinking about and like bringing back the NTMP in kind of light of the work that we're doing on this. We do have information about what collisions look like on local streets, and we do also hear very frequently from folks, who have experience of speeding or cut through traffic or other kinds of issues on their local streets that, we do need a place for that to kind of live and be responded to. And, obviously, I think it can be very challenging for residents if they don't have a way to at least get their concerns heard, right? So the NTMP is an important potential place for that. Obviously, it's been on hold now for a little while, but yes, I think there needs to be an interaction, and this plan will really kind of interact with everything that we do. How we prioritize different types of major projects will also be something that we'll want this plan to have an influence on, because it is sort of helping us sort of focus on where we have major safety issues and what strategies we think best align with those. So not just the NTMP, but I would say, a little bit of everything.
Thanks. I had another question, which is, and this is a tricky one, somewhere between the collision database, which I'm assuming you guys were using to map this out, and the NTMP on a very quiet street is the neighborhood where there are a lot of near misses, or, a place like the Willows where there are kind of accident records at almost every intersection, but no one intersection is like predominant. It's just sort of a general pattern of like not greatness. I'd love to see a way to address that or to capture that information, especially I think from parents of school-aged kids, because my perception is that when people see or hear about near misses, either when they're driving or biking, it kind of restricts their movements. So there may be places where like we can unlock more potential for multiple modes of users if we can take the places that feel too scary and identify those and include them somehow too.
Yeah, that's a great point. And absolutely, we know a couple of things, right? Like our safety data are pretty good, but not perfect. And certain types of collisions are definitely underreported, and those collisions typically include people walking and biking. It's very hard where we are to get great data about that. So some people have heard of or aware of, San Francisco has this great partnership with their county hospital, which is the only trauma center in San Francisco. And so they have this ability to actually connect to health data in a way that's much, much more challenging for places like us, where you could be going in different directions and serving a much broader area and one thing and another. So it's a lot more challenging to get some of that kind of information. And then getting near miss data is quite challenging. We certainly hear about it. We know from people, but you hear from who you hear from. And much like anything else, the people that you're not hearing from may be the people that are most impacted sometimes. So we would love to get better near miss data and love to have a better understanding of that. And I think we do have not that we don't have understandings, but obviously it'd be great to be more systematic about that, but it's quite challenging to do it. We do, in this study, and in other work, we're trying to increasingly use kind of big data to get a sense of things. So sometimes you can get data on kind of like hard braking, or you can get data on speed variability and various kinds of things that help us sort of get a better understanding of that. So we're trying to use some of that where we can to better understand it. But all of that is to say, and the Willows example is a great example, because we do, in some of the work we've done so far, kind of call out the Willows because of the pattern that you note. And Jonathan mentioned this already, but something I want to underline is that we're not just chasing the collision locations with this work. We're trying to identify the conditions of our transportation system that produce safety issues. And then where we have those conditions, so this is what kind of systemic safety means, and it's a little bit wonky to be perfectly blunt, but where those conditions exist elsewhere, we can kind of systematically address them because we know that that it might just be coincidence that we don't have a collision there. And obviously we don't get to zero with coincidence. So
could I jump in and add something, Hugh?
Yeah, of course.
Just one other data source that we did look at was police call records. And so there might be a police call, but there was no police report recorded. So the collision isn't necessarily in the database. And so we did look at sort of a geographic overlay of the police call records, but where a police report was not taken. So notably not in the data that we're presenting, to just sort of see if the geographic spread was very different. And it is helpful to note that it was very similar to the data that we included in this analysis, because that data does not have a lot of the features like age of people involved or sort of the details of the specifics. We didn't include it in the analysis, but that was something that we considered to sort of bring in as much data as we could.
I have a clarifying question. With the understanding that the answer might be all three, if you were to stack rank these in terms of the biggest reasons as to why we're not able to get everything done that we want to. I mean, all the ideas on the slide are awesome, and I would love to do everything. Between having resources and money, the political will or willingness to do everything, or the actual deciding of what the right thing to do specifically is in any given place, how would you categorize the challenges we're facing as it comes to Vision Zero?
Yeah, that's a great and very challenging question. So I'm not sure I will be able to provide total satisfaction tonight, but obviously all of those things matter. I think in the work that we do, it's important to understand, and obviously, as we work through various projects, I think other members of the commission, have a lot of great experience with this, right? Like change is hard. And so it's quite easy at a high level to be like, let's do these things, right? And then the specifics of achieving that, they require kind of like the time and energy of the community to be involved in and to participate in and feel like they've had the right kind of vetting. And process takes time to work through. And I think that is not one of the things on your list, but is probably the thing that I would kind of call out as something to be aware of, and something that we can't just say we're going to do all these things all at once and it's going to be better, because it's too much change for people to take on all at once. And so, that's okay, I think. And I think it's important on any, like we just talked about Coleman and Ringwood today, right? Like we've had an 18-month long process to kind of get to where we are today. We will have a longer process to get into fine details of that. These things do take some time and energy to work through. And it's not because there's resistance, I think, on the political side or on the staff resource side. Necessarily, obviously, our staff resources are finite, and that is an issue. And the longer any one thing takes, obviously crowds out eventually being able to do other things. So, we try to manage that as best as we can as staff, but, it's also really important that, and it's not just the people who live in a place, right? It's like everybody uses the transportation network all over the place, right? And so, really getting, especially when we do more major things, really getting the thorough vetting is important. One of the nice things, I think, to maybe flip it around, is that I think we're getting better at doing smaller things more quickly and easily. And we've been intentionally trying to build a process to do that on the city side. And I think we've got great political support, and I think great community support. And those little things can make a big difference, right? You know, just slowing down vehicles, making turns a little bit here and there can make a huge difference in where we see some of the safety issues that we have. So things are hard, big things are hard, but we need to keep working and like kind of plugging away and trying to make those things happen. And then at the same time, like, you know, kind of push through and work on some of the smaller things that we can do kind of easily. So yeah, it's a partial answer.
Praising the quick solution on Santa Cruz, you know, by Bistro Vita, et cetera, with the bike lanes. So that's a small thing that happened quickly.
I would say Middlefield wasn't a small thing. And it was really interesting to see the community initial response and to imagine how that would have played out if we had gone through the usual round of commission and council meetings. And because a lot of people had ideas about what was going to happen that you were pretty sure weren't going to happen and that so far haven't materialized. But people's sort of anecdotal data and conventional wisdom suggested that it was just going to be a nightmare. And so I really want us to use that lesson because I think it hasn't been a nightmare on Middlefield. I think it's been really, really healthy and helpful probably for all users, actually. So maybe we can use that as an example of, you know, when you have really good data and you're pretty confident and we're going to save a lot of money if we do it now instead of doing it a year and a half from now to allow for a huge public process. I think let's do more of that.
Second.
Yeah, I just, if I may, to the chair, caution, not everything is do we have the level of kind of confidence in terms of what we knew about Middlefield, how many people were using it, whether or not it would produce a problem. And, you know, something that is very common for people to resist something like a road diet because they're like, well, it'll increase congestion. It can actually be less congested and while being a lot safer sometimes. Now, it really depends on the condition and the situation you're dealing with. It's not everyone is the same, but you know, in a case like Middlefield, you do have people turning into kind of large, right, commercial properties there, right? And if those people are waiting in the lane, they're creating a lot of challenges there that are both safety and operational, right? And so giving them a lane to turn from means the people who are going through are still going through. But I think the key thing there, and obviously we'll be getting into this more, is that speeds were really high in Menlo Park. If you go immediately north or south, they're a lot lower. And so, you know, it's pretty easy to see that variation and see that like that we had a lot of room to give without making a change. But
oh wait, public comment. Sorry, are we clarifying questions? Does anybody have any? Nope. I'll try again. Does anybody have any more clarifying questions? Okay. Let's see. Matthew, can you please call for public comments on this item?
Yes, thank you, Chair Cibrian. For virtual attendees who wish to provide public comment, you may engage the raised hand feature, or if you're calling in from a landline or a cell phone, press *9 to raise your virtual hand. If you are participating in person, please wait for the chair to call your name, and then you can step up to the podium to make your comment. I currently see one virtual raised hand, and the public comment is from Seamless Bay Area.
Good evening, commissioners and staff, and Azina Levin, and I just have forgotten to double log out of the system, and so I'm commenting as me and not as any organization, as a Menlo Park resident. So I wanted to be very thankful for this, holistic and potentially proactive approach to improving safety on the city streets. Using a lot of data and forethought. And I wanted to ask a kind of finer point question to what I believe Commissioner Peruzzi had also raised, in that the NTMP is, even before this Vision Zero plan comes to council, there is a proposal study session at City Council to restart the NTMP. The historical NTMP is a program that concentrates on streets in neighborhoods that are predominantly standalone houses. The process of dealing with issues is, has to be things that people bring up. It's very time intensive with neighbors surveying their neighbors. It's designed to be slow and have a consensus process to implement anything that might slow drivers and might have a different opinion in a neighborhood. And by contrast, the 75%, and that I think those account for maybe 25% of the injuries as called out in the study in the staff report, and the 75% are more located in impacted neighborhoods that are, have a greater diversity of housing types. They focus on places that have severe injuries and fatalities on Caltrain's owned and higher speed local roads. And, many of the, like some of the neighborhoods and areas that are impacted include people who don't necessarily have enough time to report, every near miss that is experienced, or, and certainly not to put in a lot of energy into surveying their neighborhoods. So my concern is not that we will have, renewed attention to the neighborhood traffic calming, but more if we have 10 units of staff time by restarting NTMP first, might we wind up spending 80% of staff time on the 25% of collisions and the 25% of staff time on the 75% of serious injuries and fatalities? And is the streamlining proposed under NTMP enough to prevent that inverse allocation of resources? And if it is the will of the commission to have staff address it, that would be through the chair. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you. Seeing no further virtual comments, I return the meeting to the chair. Thank you.
So, I'm gonna read the next directions. Okay. I think we are to commission comments, commission feedback about this.
You go back to the slides.
Is there a particular slide?
Oh, that was just like a general comment. I have other comments if no one else wants to go. Overall, super fan of Vision Zero. I don't have any particular comments on the presentation, and totally recognize that the details are very important when it comes to any given specific intersection. And, you can't say that a roundabout is going to be better than a stop sign, is going to be better than a signal without knowing specifics. Although I know that the US generally underutilizes roundabouts and we should probably use more of them. I would say if there is a specific collision location that was not highlighted that I would like to draw attention to, it is the intersection of Middlefield and Woodland by Willow Market.
That came up.
It is the worst intersection that I've seen in the entire city. where you have 2 lanes one way and you have left turners and you have a blind intersection and you have people trying to cross, but there's no crosswalk, and it's bad for cars. It's impossible for bikers. If it can't be improved, it should be abolished. In terms of safety, I think it's just a disaster waiting to happen. And if it's not going to be structurally improved, then we should probably prevent people from even turning left there towards Palo Alto or even towards Woodland from Middlefield. I see that intersection every day and it's awful.
So if I, through the chair, stay tuned, because as part of reviewing the Middlefield pilot, we will be looking at all of Middlefield, and that'll be coming back to you and to the community in the not too distant future.
Can I go? Do you want to go, Rose? Are you done? Back that you just said that, Hugh, it reminded me of something I wanted to mention. I too really support a data-driven approach, and all the data has been so fascinating on Vision Zero and very focusing. And I also really love the prioritization of corridors. But one thing I want to get behind is the idea when you use the word emphasis area. I do think that as much as the corridor approach, I think is getting us to really prioritize well. One thing that's really fascinating about this for me is all the collateral effects that happen with everything we do. It's like you touch one thing and it's like a row of dominoes goes down. And we focused a lot on Middle. And when we did that University and Menlo intersection, it really got me thinking about downtown. It really got me thinking about, Middle Avenue, the whole Middle Avenue, right? And Oak Grove and all that. When you just said about Middlefield, don't worry, we're looking at all of Middlefield. And I know that resources are tight, but to the extent that we can do that, I think we really put into place like very sustainable, interconnected plans. And the first, thing I really worked on the commission was Middle Avenue. And there were so many people who were like, well, Middle Avenue, but how about, if you keep going? And so I know that gets challenging. We have to kind of put boundaries around projects, but I appreciate the way that the staff and I think the commission are working together well to kind of look at the whole picture every time we look at, quote, a corridor. That's it.
Thanks. I was looking at this map again and noting that I want to just emphasize and second this idea that sometimes you're just lucky. So like one of the serious injury accidents that happened is in Linfield Oaks, where there really haven't been a lot of injury accidents. And it's at an intersection that doesn't have like a big circle of a ton of accidents. It just, that was a bad day for somebody. I did notice in the Fair and Piers presentation that was in our packet that weird section around Minalto and the Willows where every single intersection's seen a little bit of action was included, and I didn't see it on your map. And I wondered if that was just an oversight.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think we I don't know if we included it in the high collision corridors per se, as much as in the thinking about the as an emphasis area. It's not like a corridor, but it's sort of like you said, it's a
bike shed for kids going to Laurel.
And it's really this weird thing where it's like every road, every intersection has one, or some have more than one, but so it's happening everywhere, but it's not happening consistently everywhere. It is sort of, in a way, the definition of systemic kind of problem, where we need to think kind of systemically about how we address it. So yeah, it's definitely an area that we didn't go through everything today. There's a lot of information, and we have been focusing on a handful of I don't want to say focus areas because we already have emphasis areas, but sort of geographic areas within this. So in addition to the kind of emphasis areas, we've been kind of highlighting Belhaven, where there's kind of a unique concentration, the Willows, where there's unique concentration, in downtown that also has unique concentration beyond the kind of corridor look. So we will, it is definitely on our radar though.
So another comment I had, I really want to support the comment about the NTMP. is like, I echo that. I somehow lost my notes here. I think my internet went away or something. But that felt important. I really appreciated the session that I went to in the Belhaven Library, and I'm hoping that the 2 sessions after that went well. I did feel like there was a surprising lack of advertising of the sessions. I heard from a bunch of people that they hadn't heard about them in what they felt like was enough time. I know a couple of council members did some sort of last minute updates and newsletters and things, but I didn't see a lot of presence on Nextdoor, and I don't know what other channels were being used. And maybe you had great turnout, and so whatever channels you were using were working. But I just wanted to flag that because I just such an important place to gather feedback.
So if I may, through the chair, I can tell we did have very good turnout at both of the workshops that were held. So that was great. And we did rely a lot on climate resilient communities to get out and kind of do, word of mouth advertising. We did put it on this newsletter article that we do, which I think works a certain amount. But yeah, we can definitely keep that in mind for the next round to try to get even more folks to come out and participate. But yeah, then we had great feedback and we had great attendance. So something worked.
I would also agree that comments about the NTP and NTMP. I want to say, I've wanted to say this for a little while. I love the new Middlefield thing. I have now traveled it as a car. I've traveled it on a bike. I haven't actually walked it because I don't really have anywhere to go over there. But I found like the number of ways I feel like it's a better experience for me as both a driver and a rider. Like it doesn't feel like a racetrack. And like that's a really noticeable feeling, and it just is a more comfortable driving experience all the way along. So I loved that thing. I like how we're focusing on the role that systems play in safety across the city. And so I think this is a nice way of looking at things and not just sort of chasing the latest thing that happened. I did notice, I'll be honest, I got a little lost in the link that went to all the crash data and then less lost in the rest of it. So it was interesting to me that it seemed like work or school related trips, because they're happening Monday through Friday between the hours of work and school, like seem to be half or more of kind of our incidents. And so like really thinking about the role that getting to and from these places is playing. It just is something I was thinking of. And then whether we're talking to middle schoolers and high schoolers, I know they can be challenging to reach, but also they are in those high risk age groups who are either a few kids are having a lot of problems or almost all of them are having at least one. Like the way the data, it's like twice their numbers of the city or their involvement in accidents, which was interesting. And then the other thing, because I've brought it up before and I'm sure I'll bring it up like 10 more times, is I read this book, Belonging. And one of the things he talks about, it really it just resonates for me quite a bit in this discussion, is in the enforcement thing, which has come up a lot. But when we do traffic enforcement, if all we do is write a ticket, we've missed an opportunity to make it better. And so inside of Belonging, like he does so many great examples of how scripts that they, like when you change the conversation that you have with the people you pull over and you use it as an opportunity to help them understand why what they're doing is making the streets more dangerous, it just helps people have a better interaction, feel more like they're involved in solving it, and I think more likely to change their actions going forward. So I would encourage us, and whether it is in looking at our teenagers who are riding their bikes while on their phone, like those are going to turn into people who drive while on their phone. And so I think looking at our next generation of drivers and looking at how they're using our roads and using our law enforcement or whatever other mechanisms we have to help them understand better, like why this is wrong, and then send a letter to their parents, because I'm not sure that their parents know just how many of them are riding around with their handlebars with a helmet on it. And like, why bring the helmet? Except that your parents made you, which means they think you're wearing it. And so I feel like we have opportunities to help so many of these like not risk averse riders make better choices now and going forward. So I love them incorporating all of that into the plan.
I have one more thing. Sorry, this is taking too long. The intersection of Willow and Ivy called out the fact that as per state requirements, we needed to add a leading pedestrian before the light. Right on red is also something that's notoriously anti-pedestrian. Is it possible that Menlo Park could just have a blanket policy that we would not allow right on red? And are those types of things where you say, this structurally is bad, let's have this be part of, similar to the leading pedestrian thing, just like part of our broader policies that we implement?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And Jonathan may know of others. I know of one city in the United States that has a no right on red policy, and that is New York City. And it's the only city that I've ever come across that has a blanket statement, and they have some exceptions that I know of, but I'm not aware of any others that do that. That being said, it's certainly something that, you know, we can discuss and think about. We may want to be a little more nuanced than that, but it's certainly something to think about. The other thing is that we can't control that on state highways. So some of our biggest problem areas are ones that we actually would not be able to control that, but we can think about that as a strategy. And again, you know, you're correctly, essentially, or whether you're doing it intentionally or not, identifying for those intersection locations we have, right turns are free right turns are creating kind of issues and problems. So I think there are a variety of things we can do to help address those. And there may be ones where not allowing right turn on red or signalizing the right turn, there could be times where that becomes kind of important. I don't know, Jonathan, if maybe you know others.
Wait, how do
I can't. Oh, sorry.
How do we do that at El Camino and Sandhill then?
How do we do it? Well, I don't know the answer to that, but my guess is that there was a particular safety issue that.
So Caltrans just said, okay.
Caltrans not opposed to it. It's not. It's not something that they would. It's not like an automatic no, right? But it's not something that they're going to automatically say yes to either.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'll just add, off the top of my head, can't think of another city, and I think that New York might be the only one, but I know San Francisco is using it as a tool on parts of their high injury network. So in the Tenderloin, there was a pretty big effort to prohibit right on red. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be a sort of blanket citywide statement, or policy, but definitely a good tool to improve pedestrian safety.
That reminds me of the presentation that staff did for us around some of the ideas about the El Camino intersections that we were looking at, like Valpo and all the way down. And I'm looking at this, would love to see those again, or when, what's the progress on those? That was, I thought, some really good work.
I'm going to add one more, mostly it's because I'm using information that I got at the Belhaven Safe Streets thing. Now, I might not have it exactly right, and you can correct me, but this question about reclaiming some of these state roads so that we can have more control over intersections in our town, because if I have it right, 7% of our roads are not owned by us, but they're 40% of our collisions? Yeah, or 7% are state-owned roads?
I think, yeah, that's.
Or do I just have it wrong?
I think you're very close there,
okay.
and we can pull that up if you want to get the exact specifics. But we do have, so there's a lot of collisions on the state highways, and channeling one of your neighbors as you are, there has been a long-standing request to pursue relinquishment of Willow Road in particular, because it only runs from Bayfront to 101. It's actually in our general plan. There's a policy to pursue that. It's something that came up a couple times recently. It is certainly something that's kind of on our radar. to do and think about it. It's a little bit complicated because it's split between East Palo Alto and Menlo Park, and they would have to accept. You couldn't relinquish just the Menlo Park parts; it'd have to be full relinquishment. So, for example, from my understanding, Caltrans would happily relinquish El Camino Real to the cities, but only if all of the cities came in and said, we want it, and getting everybody aligned can be hard. So just East Palo Alto, maybe a little bit easier, but yeah, just some context.
Does anybody have any more comments on this item? Okay, well, thank you so much for that presentation. I look forward to seeing what happens next with it. I think we are to recommend to City Council to approve the Complete Streets Commission 2023-2024 work plan. Kevin Chen, Senior Transportation Engineer, can you introduce the item, please?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So if you can give me a second here, I'm just going to go ahead and pull up what is essentially attachment A of our staff report. Oops. I'm sorry. Oh. Okay, Kevin Chen, Senior Transportation Engineer with the City of Menlo Park here. So this is actually a continuation of an item that we had discussed at our last meeting. And this is and just kind of to jog everyone's memory, we had a pretty robust and healthy conversation regarding sort of the work plan itself, some of the verbiages that goes along with it. And ultimately at the end of that meeting, the commission collectively designated Vice Chair Koh and also Commissioner Silverstein to work with staff offline to make revisions to the work plan verbiage according to the kind of the overarching conversation that we had from the last meeting. And what's in front of you essentially is the kind of the draft product of that conversation. So this is based off an offline conversation that staff and the designated subcommittee at that time had. Some of the key changes here, and I apologize for not having a red line version of it, essentially kind of the statement, the very first paragraph, there is the kind of the promote, like for example, the addition of promote safe transportation infrastructure and alternative modes of transportation. I think that's a new addition to what was there before. In terms of the sequencing of the numeric list, I think the only thing that we switched was what used to be number 1 is now number 2, and vice versa, obviously. And then in terms of the bullet, in terms of the verbiage, we took there was a consensus to take a more active verbiage. So for example, they used number 4, 5, 6 used to have continue to support. We sort of scratched that, and then now it's just support. And then wherever a item requires a recommendation from the commission to the city council, that verbiage got added into that statement as well. So collectively speaking, the verbiage is a little bit more active versus kind of a more passive sounding verbiage. Other than that, I think generally speaking, the overall work plan stays relatively the same as the last version, and specifically with the bullet list, where as I mentioned, the bullet list indicates a specific task that is either designated by the city council or a commissioner as a commissioner that would like to kind of further take action beyond your standard activities of providing feedbacks to the city council. So with that in mind, perhaps if hopefully you all had a chance to kind of take a look at it and evaluate that, if there's any additional feedback that you collectively would like to have, obviously happy to take those in right now, with the goal of a recommendation from the council, from the city, from the Complete Streets Commission tonight to recommend to the city council to adopt this work plan, and then also designate somebody to attend the September 29th city council meeting. We do expect to go to the city council with an approved work plan for their adoption as well. So hopefully we'll have someone there to answer any questions that the city council might have at that time. So with that, I'm happy to answer any clarifying questions that you might have.
I just had one. I can't remember what we decided to do about subcommittees. We were going to map them to the things. Are we going to do that later, different meeting?
That's correct. Given that we only have 4 commissioners tonight, my goal is that
so tempting to just put people in subcommittee. Right. Yeah.
Right. My goal is that we have an adopted work plan, and then we'll revisit the subcommittee conversation later on.
But the expectation is that the subcommittees would be derived from the work plan itself, right?
Absolutely, and more specifically, focusing on the bullet list. Yes.
Actually, one of my clarifying questions is when is that city council meeting potentially?
I believe it's September 29th.
I think that's a Friday.
I'm sorry, September 26th. My apologies.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yes, it's a Tuesday.
Does anybody else have any more clarifying questions? Then Matthew, can you please call for public comments on this?
Yes, thank you, Chair Severin. For virtual attendees who wish to provide public comment, you may engage the raised hand feature, or if you're calling in from a landline or cell phone, press *9 to raise your virtual hand. If you're participating in person, please wait for the chair to call your name, and then you can step up to the podium to make your comment. Seeing no virtual hands raised, I return the meeting to the chair. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. So is there any feedback from commission members? Okay, then I guess the one thing I would ask is, I think we're supposed to also, I don't mind presenting it, but also if somebody had.
Excuse me, I would nominate Chair Severin to present.
Second.
Okay. I guess we can we just vote on that? And is that a motion? Do we have to make a motion for that, or is it all just one motion to do the work plan and who's going to present it?
Do you want to amend your motion?
Do you want to make a motion?
Oh, should we maybe
amend it?
Friendly amendment to include approving the work plan and
Sure.
designating the chair to present it?
Okay.
I would second that.
That's my friendly amendment.
Okay, great. So we basically
Perfect amendment.
we have a motion to approve the work plan and also designate our chair to be at the September 26th meeting.
Oh, yes.
In case of questions. And then a second by Commissioner Baruzzi. So for those that would like to vote.
I think we have a question from Commissioner Sellers. Oh, in favor. In favor. Too.
Okay.
Great. I believe that's unanimous. Thank you very much.
All right. Under informational items, city staff provides an update on matters of importance to the commission. Informational items are not action items. However, a commissioner, city staff member, or a member of the public may request to make a comment or ask a question on any of the informational items. The one informational item tonight is update on major project status. So Kevin, can you update us on major project status?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few updates for the commission here. So you already mentioned that a little bit earlier, but just for your information, at the September 10th, there, as usual, we have our Menlo Park Farmers Market. We do expect to have some outreach materials for both the shuttle study as well as that Vision Zero action plan that you have just heard. So if you happen to be passing by the farmers market, do keep an eye out for that. Or if you know someone that might be interested of those two projects, tell them to go to the farmers market, pick up some nice produce, and also learn about the two fairly important projects that we have going on here in the city. For Middle Avenue crossing, for some of you that might be interested, if you happen to be on Elma Street and then you're somewhere near the Burgess Drive, you might see there's a little bit of a display with some fencing area. That's actually where potentially the tunnel, the undercrossing would be. There's a little board up there with some information on there. I highly recommend that you go by, just check it out, see where it will be. It's actually a pretty cool idea that that our transportation team came up with. So highly recommend that. And of course, leading into the Middle Avenue Complete Streets project, just wanted to update us, the commission, that we are still working through the final dotting our I's, crossing our T's with our permitting process. We're hoping to kind of get the contractor ready to start construction soon. As you might know, that's kind of the missing segment of Middle Avenue. Once we have that going, we'll have the whole stretch ready to go. We're also exploring a little bit of some isolated locations that we're looking at as part of the pilot right now, but all of that will eventually come back to the commission as a whole with the final recommendation. So just stay tuned for that. And with that, I will conclude my update. Thank you.
Okay. Matthew, can you call for public comments on this item, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair Sebrin. For virtual attendees who wish to provide public comment, you may engage the raised hand feature. Or if you're calling in from a landline or a cell phone, press *9 to raise your virtual hand. If you are participating in person, please wait for the chair to call your name, and then you can step up to the podium to make your comment. Seeing no virtual hands raised, I return the meeting to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I would like to add a comment on it, only because it's sort of just barely connected to that Middle Avenue update that in riding out there, I had a question about one of the lane configurations, and Kevin was kind enough to scooter out there and spend about a half an hour chatting about the Olive and Middle intersection. So thank you for that. And hopefully we'll, some weirdness about right turns onto Olive. Like some cars are still pulling into the right turn lane or into the bike lane, but the paint on the road seems to indicate that it's a right turn from the actual lane. So anyway, thank you for that. Are there any subcommittee reports or updates? Oh, no subcommittees. Okay, it's on my notes. Then I believe that we are adjourned for the evening. And thank you so much, everybody, for your time and energy.
Thank you. Good night.